Hi, everybody. This is Ranger Mike Gorman, the Richmond National Battlefield Park, and I'm going to be talking about Lincoln's visit to Richmond here on April 4th, 1865 in just a minute. I want to let everybody get on who wants to participate today. So we'll just take a minute before we get started. And for those of you that have just joined me, go ahead and pull up on Google Maps or however you want to do it. Pull up a map of Richmond. We're going to use that as we do our talk today. It doesn't have to be a period map. It can be a modern map. That's fine. All I really want to do is show you where Lincoln walked when he came through Richmond in 1865. Because, quite frankly, I was supposed to give a tour today doing the route. But COVID-19 got in the way, so here we are in quarantine on my back porch. I'm going to talk about Lincoln's visit to Richmond, and it would help if you had a map so you could follow along too. So pull up a map. Google Maps will work. Any map you have in an atlas, ADC map, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just pull up a map of Richmond, and we'll get started here in just a minute. So those of you that are waiting, I apologize, but you have time now to get a good map. I'm going to be using this, which is a really cool map that was made in the 1960s, showing all the Civil War features of Richmond. Some of which are accurate, some of which aren't. But maybe one day I'll redo it. You never know. But you can use whatever you like. So pull up a map of Richmond, and we'll get started. All right, everybody got a map? All right, welcome everybody. I'm Ranger Mike Gorman, one of the historians at the Richmond National Battlefield Park, and I'm coming to you live from my back porch here in telework and quarantine mode. As you can tell, I'm kitted up as a ranger today, which is unusual. Normally I'm in a t-shirt and sweatpants, but I'm doing research all the time, as are all the historical staff, which is really cool. One of the things that this strange tragedy affords us is the ability to do research that we sometimes don't have the ability to do when we're working the front line. So I know a lot of the staff is really excited to share things with you that they found, things that they are working on. And this podcast, or I should say podcast, but this Facebook Live series is really to highlight some of the things that get us up in the morning, that really get us excited to do the kind of work that we do. And for me, this all started back in 2002 when there was a proposal to put up a statue commemorating Abraham Lincoln's visit to Richmond in 1865. And one of the features of the statue, you can still see it at the Tredegar Ironworks, is a little Tad Lincoln sitting with Abraham Lincoln on a park bench. Well, the problem was, and it's a problem, was that one of the people that was with Lincoln during his visit to Richmond had written to the Century magazine late in the 19th century and said unequivocally that Tad was not there. This freaked me out. I mean, if we're going to put up a statue with Tad in it, we're saying Tad was there. So this launched me down this hole of research, and it really showed me something interesting. And it's something that interests all historians, but it's the problem of source material. We are always limited by what we have from the people of the past, whether it's diaries or letters or newspaper articles or whatever. It's what we've got, and it doesn't change. So the job of an historian is to go and find those things, and finding them is fun. You can find more now than you ever could thanks to the internet, but find these things and interpret them. Try to figure out what they're actually saying, or was the guy writing 40 years after the fact forgetting things, or was he lying, or who knows what. But what it winds up being is this wonderful journey of discovery. And that's really what history is. It sort of bothers me that when I came out of school, and I bet a lot of people here are the same way, when I came out of school, I kind of had the idea that history was fixed, that some geniuses out there had read everything there was to read and put it in a textbook, and that's it. There's really not a whole lot more work to be done. Wrong. There's a whole lot of work to be done. Nobody's really ever written a book well, I wrote a long article about it, but nobody's ever written a book or it really put this event in the context that it deserves. In fact, the very first historians that took on Lincoln's life, his aides, Nicolay and Hay, when they looked at this event and they wrote it down. They said, now this is funny because this is really the problem of this entire event. They said, there remains no trustworthy account of this strange presidential entry. The printed narratives of it, written from memory after the lapse of many years, are so evidently colored by fancy that they do not invite credence. So they're saying, we can't figure it out. We don't know what happened. But unfortunately for historians everywhere, after writing that, they went on to go ahead and try to figure it out themselves. And they got a lot wrong. But you'd be on solid historical ground if you cited what Nicolay and Hay put in their books. And that's the problem. They knew Lincoln. They knew the people that were involved. And here they are saying it. How can you argue with them? Well, the reason we can argue with them is because there are a lot of sources that say things differently than what they did. And we're going to walk through some of them today. So a lot of what I want to do right now, without giving you the whole hour-and-a-half tour, is to sort of help you understand not just what happened, but where Lincoln went. One of the first problems that came up when I started looking at this event was where Lincoln landed. Now, Nicolay and Hay told us that Lincoln landed at Rocket's Landing, which kind of makes sense. It's the port of Richmond. That's where most boats would have put in. But the problem was, when you start to look at the sources, you understand that Lincoln did not come into Richmond in a large naval vessel. He came in aboard a rowboat. Now, I only have a little bit of time today, and I could tell you a 30-minute story about why that happened. But suffice to say, the naval vessels that put out from City Point, there were about 5 of them. They were coming up, flags flying, everything was great. But they came to Drury's Bluff, which is one of our sites. In fact, if you haven't been there, this is a great time to do it. But they came to Drury's Bluff, and they found that the Confederates had laid obstructions in the form of sunken vessels and piles of stone across the channel. They couldn't get up the river, so they had to stop. Now, at this point, you'd think if you were Admiral Porter, the leader of this flotilla, you'd say, sir, it's not going to happen today. Let's head back to City Point. Somebody at that moment said, no, let's go. And it was probably President Lincoln. Okay, great. Well, we can't get the big boats across the obstructions, so they get into the Admiral's steam launch, which is a fairly sized boat, but it was under its own power. The problem is that Porter knows that on the way from Drury's Bluff up to Richmond are tons of mines that the Confederates have laid there to prevent any kind of naval incursion to Richmond. And they haven't been cleared. So Porter's idea is, all right, the president wants to go. Well, I'll take the steam launch and we'll drive that up the James River, but we'll also have towed behind it a little rowboat. And the president and his son will be in that rowboat. So if we hit a mine, the steam launch will blow up, but not the rowboat. Okay, that's cool. So they're going up the James River, and they come upon this bridge where there's a boat pinned against the pilings. Turns out that boat was piloted by none other than Admiral Farragut of Damn the Torpedoes, Full Speed Ahead fame, one of the few admirals in the U.S. Navy at the time. And Admiral Porter is coming up, sees this. You can imagine Farragut there, oh, hello, help me. And they realize, oh my God, it's the president and Admiral Porter. So Porter, probably laughing all the time, decides to help him off the pilings when the steam launch gets pinned against those same pilings. So now the only vessel available to Richmond is that little rowboat. And so Marines and sailors are aboard the little rowboat. Actually, it's somewhat of a controversy whether they're Marines or sailors. I tend to lean towards that they were sailors. And started to row Lincoln up to Richmond. Now, this is where your maps are going to come in handy because, let me stand up with mine. Hope everybody can see this. Now here's Rocket's Landing, right here, the port of Richmond. And that's where if you were in a major vessel, you would probably land. But Admiral Porter said that they came up the James and came aground amidst the rocks in the James River. Well, anyone who's been to the James River knows where the rocks begin. It's right here near the Mayo Bridge, right here. And Lincoln made a joke about that now Porter has grounded his vessel just like Farragut had, and that they would need the help of the Army engineers to get them off. Probably not the joke you want to crack to a Navy admiral at this time. But Porter shrugs that off and says his men pushed downstream to the only suitable landing point we could find, where there was a bridge over the canal. Now, that is a location key. For those of you that are into the process of history and how you look at documents, there's a biggie. When he says something specific like that, a bridge over the canal, you should take notice. Because if you notice down here at Rocket's Landing, there's no bridge over the canal. There's no canal at all. Here's the canal, and there's a bridge. You can see on my map here, it says drawbridge. And that map shows it going right down from 17th Street across the canal. So when Porter says we pushed off the rocks and put in the only suitable landing point we could see where there was a bridge over the canal, he's talking about this sandbar right here where there's a waste treatment plant today. And this is where things get interesting. So this bridge, which no longer exists, it's at the foot of 17th Street. So those of you that are following along on your maps, you might recognize, here's Carey Street right there. So 17th and Carey, if you know where Bottoms Up Pizza is, that's where that is. But that bridge was right behind where the flood wall is today. So you can walk through the flood wall, and there's a nice little bricked area, and there's a nice sign there. It doesn't commemorate Lincoln's visit. Hopefully one day we'll put up a sign there. But right there was where that sandbar was, right across the canal. So you can stand right about there and look across where Lincoln almost certainly landed. The problem is that if you'd been landing here, there would have been an escort and U.S. Army officials to take you into Richmond. They would have known you were coming. But instead, this rowboat kind of snuck up into Richmond and landed right in here. And now Lincoln is getting into Richmond unattended. And that's going to be a problem. But not for a reporter who just happened to be in the best place to be at the right time. His name was Charles Coffin, and he was a journalist from Boston and had a knack for sort of getting all the scoops. And today, he is going to get the scoop of scoops because he is walking along the downtown canal when he notices coming up over that sandbar, there's Abraham Lincoln. Whoa. Now, rule number one of being a journalist is not to make yourself the story. Well, he blew that off pretty fast. He noticed that these now former slaves were working on fixing this bridge and putting in the pilings for what would become a pontoon bridge across the James River, because you see that the Confederates had burned all the bridges across the James River. So the Federals were going to put in this new pontoon bridge. And what had they done? Well, they'd come into Richmond and they'd impressed former slaves to go to work doing this. Now, let's think about that for a second, because remember, we think of the capture of Richmond as the emancipation event for the enslaved people of Richmond. Yeah, but if you're one of them, I mean, what does freedom look like? Yeah, okay, the Confederates are gone, but geez, now the Federals are coming in telling me to go to work. Well, is that freedom? But now imagine being one of those people who's wrestling with the idea of what freedom is, and you look over and there's Abraham Lincoln. That's going to kind of change your day. But Coffin wasn't waiting for that to happen. Coffin said, not far away, a lieutenant had some 40 or 50 colored men at work laying a bridge across the canal. That's the pontoon bridge. Turning to one, I said, I suppose you were a slave. Yes, boss. Would you like to see the man who gave you your freedom, Abraham Lincoln? There he is. He leaped in wild ecstasy and tossed his hat into the air. In a moment, the entire company were shouting and running to gather around the man who had given them their freedom. I recall a Negro woman who was jumping in ecstasy, clapping her hands and shouting, "Glory, glory, glory." She could find no other words. We, who have always had our liberty, we cool-blooded Anglo-Americans, can have no adequate realization of the ecstasy of that moment on the part of these colored people of Richmond. They were drunk with ecstasy. They leaped into the air, hugged and kissed one another, surged around the little party in a wild delirium of joy. They would gladly have prostrated themselves before him, allowed him to walk on their bodies, if by doing so they could have better expressed their joy. Now, no doubt that is a white man viewing this, and that account is from a white man's eyes. But truly try to imagine being there, having your first day of freedom now capped by seeing Abraham Lincoln walking through the city that you've grown up in, worked in, been enslaved in. It's kind of obvious now it's over, right? That's the effect that this is happening. Imagine that emotion. Imagine that just delirium. But from a practical standpoint, this is a problem because you've got Admiral Porter, a few sailors, and a few Army officers, and one naval officer with the president, along with his son, now being surged by this ecstatic crowd. It would have been like a concert when the lights go out. Everybody's sort of pushing forward towards the presidential party. So Porter has to arm those sailors, put the bayonets on the carbines, and have them surround the president. And now they're moving through town. Coffin said that either he or one of the enslaved people, or former enslaved people, guided them. And where is their target? Their target is, back to our map. Let me get over here. The former White House of the Confederacy at 12th and Clay Streets. Some of you have been there. It's open to the public every day when we don't have a global pandemic. But here he is at the foot of 17th Street, and he needs to get up here. Now, you'll notice on my map, this yellow area here, that's the area of the evacuation fire. You see, when the Confederates evacuated Richmond, they set fire to a lot of the warehouses in downtown, but it got out of control. And it took out a lot of the downtown area. So all of this is one vast ruin. So if you're here and you need to get here, you can't go like this. You can't go through those ruins. Now, Coffin said that they marched up from the landing point, crossed that bridge, and they came up to Main Street. They marched down that a little while and then up to Franklin. And you can see why, because they wouldn't want to go Main Street because they'd go right into the ruins. So what they did was they went to about where the 17th Street Market is, and then cut up to Franklin Street. Those of you that are going to try to walk this, hopefully you will notice that they are working on opening up Franklin Street underneath the train sheds of Main Street Station. So you'll actually, for the first time, which is what I hope to do today, actually, was to actually get up on Franklin and do exactly the route that Lincoln took. So it'll be like this. See? So they get up from 17th Street up to Main Street, over to the market, then up to Franklin. Now, as they did so, Lincoln and Coffin could not have known this, but they were walking right into the former slave trading heart of Richmond, where Lumpkin's Jail and countless other auction houses and slave jails existed. For the people that are now surging around him, remember these people that have encountered Lincoln, these former enslaved people, are looking at this. They're not going to let this go. This is their day. This is their event, and they're going to follow him the entire way. So whoever that lieutenant was that was working on that bridge has got to be just like, well, guess that bridge isn't getting done today, because now his entire workforce is crowding around the president, and not just them. Admiral Porter said no electric wire could have carried the news faster than it was received by the colored people of Richmond. So all of a sudden now you've got this massive crowd coming in to see the president, and he just walked into the market area, which would be like walking into the mall circa 1981. Everyone is seeing it. Everyone is participating in this event as he turns up from Main Street up to Franklin Street. Now, this is where things get interesting because lots of people are crowding around. Porter is the officer in charge, and he is freaking out. He's going to be looking at every window, just be like, oh my God, what's going to happen? It's going to be on my watch. You know, if somebody stabs him or shoots him or anything like that, what is going on? This is a nightmare, right? He doesn't want this to happen. But the problem is, now, if you're Lincoln and Tad, I mean, imagine the emotion of Lincoln, right? He's come up from City Point. His wife has pretty much left him in a huff. Everyone saw it. It's embarrassing. It's little Tad's birthday. He's 12 years old. He's got his little boy by his hand, and all these people around him see him as if he was a deliverer, a Messiah, Moses. Where can you find the emotional center to put yourself to relate to that? I can't. If I was coaching an actor to say, here's how you should play this, they'd be like, I can't go there. And I think that's absolutely correct. These emotions are so heightened. These really would push you to your limit. And at some point, somewhere along Franklin Street, as they said, at the base of the hill upon which stands the Capitol, somewhere probably close to Governor Street and Franklin, Lincoln stopped, and he really sees the power of this moment. He stops to rest. Now, Admiral Porter wrote about this many years later, and one of the problems is Admiral Porter should be my best correspondent. He should be the guy that I lean on for almost everything. He should be our best source. The problem is he became a novelist after the war and saw his job as embellishing the story. And he wrote it about 14 times, and the fish got bigger every time. And so his account of this is that they were sitting there, and this former enslaved person who was dressed very poorly, broke from the crowd, threw himself at the ground, and began, bless you, Master Abraham Lincoln, all this kind of stuff. And Lincoln said, "Get up, you're free as air. You should bow to no man ever again," and basically curses him out. But Coffin was there and wrote about it the very day that this happened. And I'll read you his account, and then we'll move on. But contrast the two, and you'll see the problem of historical sourcing. This is Coffin the day of. He says, "We reached the base of the hill upon which stands the Capitol. Mr. Lincoln was wearing his overcoat. The afternoon was warm, the sun shining, and he halted for a brief rest. The crowd had greatly increased. A cavalryman dashed away to General Shepley's headquarters for an escort. While thus halting, an aged Negro, wearing a few rags, barefooted, without a coat, his tattered garments made from gunny cloth, whose white crisp hair appeared through his crownless straw hat, which he lifted from his head, and half kneeling with clasped hands, gave utterance to the benediction, 'May the good Lord bless and keep you safe, Massa President Abraham Lincoln.' The president lifted his own hat from his head and bowed to the old man. It was a bow which upset the forms, laws, customs, and ceremonies of centuries. It was a death shock to chivalry and a mortal wound to caste. The moisture gathered in his eyes. He wiped it away, and the procession moved on." Wow. How many times do you think that man had been acknowledged by a white man as a man? A bow, a tip of the hat, a simple gesture, which meant everything. And people who saw this took it as such. It was Abraham Lincoln saying, "This is a man." Now, whatever the political complications are around the 13th Amendment, around what is going to happen to the freed people, here's Abraham Lincoln himself personally demonstrating how he sees this fellow human being as a man. It's pretty powerful. Now, you'll notice that at that point, Coffin said, a cavalryman dashed off to get an escort. At this point, Lincoln came under, finally, a military escort. And you've got to know, Porter was just like, "Thank you, God. It's not my problem anymore." And from that point, he was taken up Governor Street, all the way up to 12th and Clay, where he entered the former executive mansion of the Confederacy. What a moment that must have been. Now, Jeff Davis and his family had long since fled, but now it is the military headquarters of the U.S. Army in Richmond. That's why Lincoln wanted to go there. It wasn't some, I want to see this, or I want to, he wants to meet with the military authority. And so when he gets there, the problem is the military commander, General Weitzel, is not there. You can imagine that he probably thought that Lincoln was going to land at Rocket's Landing. Wouldn't be a foolish thing to do. He was busy down at the Capitol. He's probably signing papers and doing all the things that he had to do to be the military governor of Richmond, when somebody came up to him and said, Lincoln is back at your headquarters. And he had to spaz and quickly rush there, which he did. But this has turned into an informal gathering now. Seemingly every white officer in Richmond is coming into the White House of the Confederacy to greet Lincoln, to shake his hand. Lincoln doesn't seem to have been very interested in partying at this time. It's been a hard walk up that hill. He seems to have just wanted a glass of water, and someone said they ate sandwiches. The housekeeper, however, tried to move the crowd away from Lincoln by serving drinks in the dining room. And if you go to the White House of the Confederacy, ask them about it, you can actually see where that dining room was, and you can see the room where Lincoln was off to the right-hand side. But this is where things get super interesting. If this story wasn't crazy enough, it just gets crazier at this point. While we're at the former White House of the Confederacy, a man shows up who says, "I've got a plan." And it's Judge Campbell, who'd been on the Supreme Court before the Civil War, had gone south when secession came, and was the Assistant Secretary of War for the Confederate States of America. And Lincoln decides to meet with him. They withdraw into the drawing room. That's why it's called a drawing room. And they meet. Weitzel and Lincoln meet with Campbell. And Campbell says he has this great idea. Now, I want you to listen really closely and see if you can spot what's wrong with this idea. But also think about how it would have seemed like manna from heaven to Abraham Lincoln. Campbell says that there are a lot of people in the South and in Richmond in particular that want to meet and bring Virginia back into the Union. And that if Lincoln will allow the Virginia legislature to come in and rescind the ordinance of secession, that then all the soldiers from Virginia would have no legal basis upon which to continue to fight. That means Robert E. Lee, right? Which would essentially end the war in Virginia. The key is Lincoln has to allow the Virginia legislature to meet. Problem. If the legislature meets, you're recognizing a rebel body, a rebel legislative body. And if they can legally rescind the ordinance of secession, they had the legal right to do it in the first place. Now, we can argue about this right and left. It was decided by the Supreme Court, Texas v. White, after the Civil War. But suffice to say that Lincoln saying that there is no legal right to secession has been the legal underpinning of the entire war. So if you allow the Virginia legislature to meet, you recognize a rebel body. If they rescind the ordinance of secession, you recognize the right to secede in the first place. But at this moment, having experienced all that Lincoln did, it sounds great, and he wants to hear more about it. And so he invites Campbell to meet with him the next day, along with any of these prominent citizens he mentioned that might want to do this. And so when he leaves the White House of the Confederacy and steps into a carriage to ride around Richmond, he thinks in his mind that he has put into place a plan that will end the war. Now, think about this, because we all know that on April 15th, 1865, Lincoln goes to the theater and is shot by John Wilkes Booth. Whatever plans he had for Reconstruction go up in smoke. And a lot of historians will tell you, we don't know what Lincoln's Reconstruction plans were. We don't know what his thinking was. And we don't know what his Reconstruction would have looked like at all. But here we get a tiny, tiny little peek. In his mind, if it will end the war, if it will bring Virginia back into the Union, if it will end this bloody war, try it. Okay. You see him acting not as a president, not as a political animal, not as a creature of Washington, but as a man. I can tell you that's a stupid plan. It's not going to work. And it is stupid. But men can be stupid. And at this moment, that's where he is. He has felt all the emotions of the day. And he's not done yet. He has seen all these people that see him as a deliverer and are flocking around him in their emancipation event with his little son on his birthday. That must have made sense to him at the time. But at this moment, he's going to get into a carriage and ride from 12th and Clay Streets down to Capitol Square. Right here. Oops, right here. A lot of you know where that was, or is. Now, we don't know the exact route, but it seems that they came in by the 9th Street Gate, which is right there near the Washington statue. And as best we can tell, they did not stop. They rode around the Capitol, past the governor's mansion, and then right back out. From this point, the best accounts we have, and there's really only one, have us driving down 9th Street, through the ruins on Main Street, and then all the way down to about 20th Street, where they hung down and visited Libby Prison. Now, Libby Prison had been the main Confederate prison for Union officers during the war, and the site of one of the largest prison breaks ever in February of 1864, when 109 men tunneled out of Libby Prison. But here we have an amazing account from Coffin and Weitzel. Remember, Coffin has not given up this scoop, so he's hanging out the whole time. Coffin said He visited Libby prison, breathed for a moment its fetid air, gazed upon the iron-grated windows and the reeking filth upon the slippery floors, and gave way to emotions which he could no longer suppress. I get it. I would too. Looking around Libby prison, now empty of Union officers, what if we had done this in 1863? Why did it have to take 4 years? Could I have done something more? All these questions are running through his mind, combined with all the emotions of where he already was. I say, what took you so long? And just as a human being, I want to put an arm around him. But Weitzel took this opportunity to finally get Lincoln to tell him what he wants to do. And he says, I took the president to Libby prison and Castle Thunder. Both were very crowded with rebel prisoners. I had considerable conversation with him in regard to the treatment of the conquered people. The pith of his answers was that he did not wish to give me any orders on that subject, but as he expressed it, if I were in your place, I'd let him up easy. Let him up easy. And that's all the advice that Lincoln gave to Weitzel. Poor Weitzel will have this bite him in the hindquarters very soon, because as anybody knows, when you have kind of big events, you want to get it in writing, and unfortunately Weitzel didn't. So Lincoln's advice to let him up easy sounds good at the time, but if you start implementing that policy and people start hearing about it in the North, it looks like you're coddling to the rebels, and that's unfortunately what will happen, and another story for another time. But at this point, Lincoln is pretty much done with his visit to Richmond, and from Libby prison, he'll get back in his carriage and ride all the way down to Rocket's Landing, where the USS Malvern, Porter's flagship, has finally arrived, passing the obstructions of Drew's Bluff and coming up. And there Lincoln will spend the night. So it is true that Lincoln did stay a night in Richmond. He did so aboard a vessel in the middle of the James River, in the middle, right here, opposite Rocket's Landing. The next day, Campbell met with him again. And Lincoln reiterated his conditions for this kind of peace. He said there can be no going back on the Emancipation Proclamation. There is no way that we're going to grant any kind of ceasefire. And this is where we're going to go from here. But basically, he said everything else is on the table. The problem was that Campbell had oversold his message. Yeah, that great plan to bring in the legislature and all that. He couldn't find but one person who would join him to meet with the president, Gustavus Myers. And so Lincoln must have been a little squirrely about this, but still, and at the conclusion of that meeting, Lincoln basically gave them the go-ahead. So Weitzel and Campbell are working together. They're going to put out a call for the Virginia legislature to meet. Lincoln understood it to mean that the legislature was trying to meet and that he just wouldn't stop them. It's a different thing when Weitzel starts to call them together, but again, another story for another time. The point being, from Lincoln's perspective, when he has his final meeting with Campbell and Weitzel and Myers there on the Malvern, he thinks he's done it. He's put a plan into place that will start the beginning of this healing that must happen. So when he gets in his next boat and drives away from Richmond, that's got to be the way he felt. Now, events are going to happen very fast. April 4th, he's visiting Richmond. April 5th, he's meeting with Campbell and Myers. And, of course, April 6th, the very next day, he's down at City Point when the Battle of Sailor's Creek happens. And a lot of Lee's army is captured. And, of course, we know that this is all culminating towards Appomattox. Lincoln does not know that. For all he knows, Lee's army is going to get away and join up with Joseph Johnston, and they're going to fight on, and it's going to go on and on and on. So his plan, in his mind, this could do it. And so when he gets on a boat and rides from City Point up to Washington, when he gets back to Washington, the news has finally hit that Lee's army has surrendered. That kind of puts his plan up in smoke. But there it is, folks. There is Lincoln's tiny peek at what his Reconstruction might have looked like. And his visit to Richmond, a lot of people ask me, what was this about? Why did he come? It's risky. It's crazy. I mean, he was walking into the former Confederate capital. There are a lot of people there that don't like him, and they have weapons. Why would he do this? This might be beyond the realm of what history can do. Those kind of answers maybe are best left to a playwright or a poet, somebody who makes a movie. And if you put a gun to my head and said, Mike, tell us. Tell us why Lincoln came. I would give you an answer, but I'd cover it with and tell my family that I love them. Maybe it's just that he's the only one in the United States who can say, I want to get on a boat, a steam launch, a frickin' rowboat, and go into Richmond to see it, to be present. And as park visitors, what do? That's what we do. That's what gets us in the car and makes us drive out to Cold Harbor, Gaines's Mill, Malvern Hill, Drury's Bluff, wherever. We want to see the place where it happened. And maybe it's just that simple. But encountering his role now, not just as a president, not just as a man, but now a symbol, a living symbol of emancipation, of the end of slavery, of the victory over the U.S. against the Confederacy, I think that's more than a man can take. And so multiple times you see Lincoln crying, breaking down. And I can't blame him at all. And we can say, yeah, Mike, that was a stupid plan. That Reconstruction wouldn't have worked. And I'll say, yeah, you're right. But what a moment where we actually get to see him without the trappings of presidency, without the cabinet all around him, without Washington, without the beautiful written language, just behaving like a man. And isn't that enough? Why can't it be enough? But that's what we would have talked about if we'd done our tour today. And I hope I gave you enough with the map that you could kind of walk it yourself. Hopefully, when this is all over, I'll be able to reschedule the tour and we can do this together. I would love to. It's very strange for me to be talking about these big emotional events while looking at a computer screen. And as I said, I can't quite wrap this up on a definitive note, and maybe that's also part of the problem of history. You want those answers, but they're elusive. You can try to find them, you can source everything, but they're elusive. And you say, well, isn't there someone that could tell us? And yes, that person was a novelist, Admiral Porter, who was there, but embellished and embellished. And as much as I hate to, it might be proper to say, let's let him have the final word. He said, I should have preferred to see the President of the United States entering the subjugated stronghold of the rebels with an escort more befitting his high station. Yet that would have looked as if he came as a conqueror to exult over a brave but fallen enemy. He came instead as a peacemaker, his hand extended to all who desired to take it. And I think that's about right. Thank you all so much for joining us on this Facebook Live chat with Ranger. I've gone far over my time, but I'm going to hang around. If anybody wants to ask me any questions in the comments, please do. I love corresponding and figuring out what this event meant. And remember, folks, all this is what I know right now. I'll find more stuff. You'll find more stuff. People will send me more stuff, and we'll get a more complete picture of this. And that's what history is. It doesn't end. It's not fixed. It will change. The meanings will change. And that's what's wonderful. And that's what gets me up in the morning. And thank you for letting me do this job. I'll see you when we all get better. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.